So if you know that my favorite drink is the mojito, you've been observing me. And guess what? I've been observing all of you too. I know a lot of things about each one of you here. So, who here is a parent? Okay. I know that you're really concerned about what your children are going to grow up to do. I also know that you wonder what's the best education for them. But most of all, you really just want them to be happy. Okay, so who here is a student? I've been observing you too. And I know that sometimes when you're sitting in the classroom, you start to disengage and you get bored. Yes. But I also know that you're extremely curious, smart, and love learning. Now, who here is an educator? All right. So, I know that sometimes you feel stuck with a curriculum that hasn't been updated for years. You really want to impact children's lives and your students' lives, but sometimes you feel that it's hard to keep them engaged. Who here hasn't raised their hand at all? I know something about you too. I know where you live. I also know that your home is at a critical juncture in history. Issues like environmental degradation, violation of fundamental human rights, social injustice, and widespread violence are putting your home at risk. And in fact, we all share this one home, also known as planet Earth. Ooh, I'm feeling like I'm getting the room a little depressed here. And that's not my intention. In fact, it's quite the contrary. Okay, so here's the good news. I'm going to tell you about 4 things that our schools need to do to transform all these problems that I've described. First is to help our students really reflect on their purpose. Secondly, to help them focus on their strengths. Thirdly, to adopt inquiry-based learning. And fourth, to really nurture deep empathy. So let me start off by telling you a story about how I got into education. I was 25 years old and I was living in San Francisco working as a management consultant. My best friend from childhood days was coming to visit me after many years. And he arrived a few days before our vacation started. So he observed me every morning, kind of putting on my dark gray suit, heading off to work as a management consultant, coming back 10 hours later. And so when we finally, 3 days after this, started our road trip down the coast of California, we had a lot of time to talk. And Julian asked me, Mohit, what is it that you do as a management consultant and why are you a management consultant? So I had a really difficult time trying to explain to my best friend not only what I did, but certainly why I did what I did. I ended by saying something like, oh, I'm getting a lot of responsibility across multiple industries and cross-functional teams. That didn't convince him. So I was quite upset about this conversation and quickly changed it to him. I said, Julian, I haven't seen you for a few years either. What is it that you're doing? And he said, Mohit, you know me very well. You know that I love kids and you know that I love sports. And I firmly believe when kids do sports, it's good for them. They feel better about themselves. So I became a sports teacher. It took Julian exactly 30 seconds to explain to me not only what he did, but why he did what he did. Julian had found his calling. This exchange helped me realize that I had not deeply thought about my purpose. So at the age of 25, I started thinking about what do I really care about and what am I going to do about it. It took me about a year after this initial conversation to make the transition from corporate America to being an educator. These conversations about purpose can't be left to chance. We ask our children, what do you want to do when you grow up? When we should be asking them, what's the impact that you want to have when you grow up? focusing on strengths. Now, when I was 8 years old, my family moved from Calcutta, India to Geneva, Switzerland. I remember being terrified my first day of school. Not only was I going to be the new kid, but I didn't even speak the language of instruction, which was French. My mom took me to school, and I'll never forget my first meeting with my teacher, Mr. Belde, my third grade teacher. My mom, who spoke a little French, was explaining to Mr. Belde that, look, we're really worried and concerned about my son Mohit, who doesn't speak French, but we're going to help him at home and catch up. And Mr. Belde kind of ignored my mom, looked at me, gave me a big smile, and bent down and shook my hand, and he said in his best English, "You will be just fine. In fact, you can help us all learn English." By focusing on my strengths rather than my weaknesses, he's given me a confidence that stays with me today. The research from the field of positive psychology is overwhelming. We rise to meet the expectations that are set for us. We learn much better when we feel confident, empowered, and are enjoying the process. Sports coaches and executive coaches alike are using this strengths-based approach. How many more research studies do we need to wait for before schools can adopt this kind of approach? Can we start putting the spotlights on our A's and the high grades instead of the F's and the low grades? Probably not. Probably not as long as we have to go through a standardized curriculum for all our unique students. So let's change that. Our schools need to help children discover their strengths and then really develop those. Inquiry-based learning. For those of you students who sometimes find yourself bored in class, I think it's because you had very little say in deciding what you learn. You also don't know why you're learning it, and it doesn't feel that relevant to the fast-changing world that we live in. 5 years ago, I had the opportunity to meet up with Mr. Belde again, the man who shook my hand more than 30 years ago. It was a wonderful hour I spent with him in a cafe in Geneva, and I had a chance to tell him what an impact he had had on my life. But I couldn't help asking Mr. Belde this one question. I asked him, "Mr. Belde, what's your secret sauce of teaching?" He smiled and he said, "You love your students and you do what it takes." But after hesitating for a second, he said, "But there's one more thing. There's one thing that I do that I really do think makes a lot of difference. It's not easy, but every year I take my lesson plans and I trash them and I recreate new ones every year." And he said, "I'm so glad I do that because Geneva today is so different from the Geneva you lived in back in the 80s, and my classroom has changed so much." Mr. Belde has truly entered the 21st century with a 21st century curriculum. I have now been working with social entrepreneurship for almost a decade. I hear stories of young social entrepreneurs who are dropping out of schools to start organizations that are impacting the world. They are following an issue that they're passionate about and that plays to their strengths. And guess what? They are creating jobs for themselves in the process. Our schools need to help nurture these change makers, not have a curriculum that's so rigid that it forces them out. So how can we put such a curriculum in place? What if we ask our students the question, what impact do you want to have on the world, and how can we support you to do that? This self-generated inquiry question would become the backbone of their learning. In fact, a charter school is doing exactly that. Students develop an inquiry question, which they then focus on for the whole semester. The different subjects like math, social studies, English integrate into their self-generated inquiry. We need such schools to be the norm, not the exception. Crowdsourcing our curriculum from our students. What a concept. Nurturing empathy. Bill Drayton, a pioneering social entrepreneur, affirms that with the world changing faster and faster, the rules matter less and less. So we need to be increasingly dependent on the people around us to guide our behavior, and this requires much deeper empathetic skills. Empathy is also at the heart of emotional intelligence. It is not being explicitly nurtured in schools now, and it needs to be. In our globalizing world, more and more of the work that's analytical is being outsourced to machines. Empathy is fundamentally human. It cannot be outsourced. So, by cultivating empathy, not only can we help our young people be more successful in a world that requires increasing levels of collaboration across cultures, but it's also a fundamental and key quality of change makers. Can schools help develop empathy? Certainly, certainly. I'm now working for a university that focuses on transforming conflict. One approach that they use to help students really step into the shoes of the other is the technique of role plays. Such approaches can definitely be brought to youth at a younger age group. And frankly, problems like bullying, which seem to dominate our headlines, I can't think of a better way than to prevent that than by nurturing empathy. So what if we did all of this? What if we changed our schools and more broadly our educational processes to help students reflect on their purpose, to focus on their strengths and not their weakness, to develop inquiry-based learning, and to nurture empathy? I think if we did this all, we would be providing all the conditions for them to be fulfilled. This is not rocket science. So, I have a vision. I have a vision of students who graduate with their confidence to attack some of the world's most pressing issues. I see youth with razor-sharp clarity about their purpose, who understand themselves and their unique strengths. Youth who are not afraid to try, fail, learn from their mistakes, and carry on. I can picture an issue like youth unemployment becoming extinct because these change makers will be creating jobs for themselves and others. And these jobs won't feel like work because they'll be loving what they're doing. But perhaps, most importantly, our students will be happy. And by happy, I mean a holistic sense of well-being, where success and happiness is not measured by how much they accumulate, but the impact that they have. I am a student, I am an educator, and I am a parent as well. I look forward to being the change. Thank you.